just want to throw this out there, kind of some prerequisites. First of all, we're not going to be talking about the details of anything that you might have read in the paper as far as the evidence. We're going to talk about why it's being pursued, the implications of it, how it's supposed to work. And Eric's heard some stuff from other talk hosts that may not have been represented correctly on the why behind this. But I'll say this. I have seen people say things about the fraud. It's wide. There's no evidence of widespread fraud. I've said this before. I think if Biden is officially declared our winner, he'll be my president. That's just the way it goes. But it doesn't have to be widespread for it to be effective. I've seen this lawsuit so far in headlines be declared it's a sham, it's all for show, malpractice, it's a sign of being desperate, which all may be true, but they're all using the system. And the last thing I'll say as we move into this, I wish we could get back. I'll look deep into the camera, into your souls. I wish we could get back to where we did not have to rush to judgment about everything based off the headlines we read. And that goes from when we see the police officers interacting with civilians. That goes from when we hear allegations, when the allegations for people that we like, we want everybody to follow the process, innocent till proven guilty. When the allegations are about the other team, we want to believe the headlines. And it's the same when we hear things about the election. There's a system and a process in place. And when people use the system and processes in place, it doesn't mean that they're doing something to steal anything. It means they're following the system. They're using everything to their means to get to the truth. And that's all we really want. We just want to make sure we have fair elections. And if that means you have to go through a legal process, I do not understand why everybody gets upset about that. Because at the end of that legal process, we should come up with the truth. There you go. Just want you to know that 2 minutes and 30 seconds will be the smartest stuff I say in comparison because he's not up on the screen yet. At that point, when he comes up, I'm now way, way dumber. What's up, Eric?
Hey, Clint. You're way better looking. You're way nicer. You know how to use this equipment better. I just happen to have a law degree and do a lot of reading. That's what I contribute to the world.
I will say this, and I'll give you a plug about the technology. Your setup now, being on camera, is way better than it was a few months ago when you were really close to the camera. And you look, I mean, it's just, you're doing way better with the technology component of this.
Well, it depends on, see, I'm at my office today and I can have the camera over there on top of the screen. When I'm at home, the cord's not long enough at my home camera and I have to have it on I have a stand just like this that I set. Where's the camera? There we go. Set it up. I set it up and it's too close. I've played around with it and pushed it a little farther away when I'm at home.
Sometimes you look like that Blair Witch scene with right up the nose and stuff. And I kind of go, man, he looks like a scary movie. But then you back off. You're not, like you said, though, you're here for your knowledge. So tell people about your degree. And we normally don't push the history part of what you do, even though most people that know you're a history, more than just a history buff. You have a degree in history. So tell everybody your bona fides, and then let me ask the question to get you started.
So I have a law degree. Research assistant, and I consider myself to be somewhat of a constitutional law scholar. It's kind of my hobby when I'm not practicing law and helping my clients. I like to read about the Constitution and the history of the Constitution, and I've been doing that most of my adult life. I'm also undergrad. I was a history major, and American history, American political history, American military history, our wars, what we've been through as a nation. That's my big hobby. It's like what I like to study. I research that stuff. I follow that stuff all the time. While we're going through all this stuff, I'm simultaneously reading a book right now about the naval war in the Pacific in World War II. That's absolutely fascinating. This is what I'm into. Our country, our history, our politics, and our Constitution. I'm a veteran. I was in the Navy. I did that for 5 years after college, and before I went to law school, I got to fly P-3s at the very end of the Cold War and chase Russian submarines that had missiles aimed at North America that would have taken out whole cities if the balloon had gone up. And I take my role as a veteran who has taken an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States extremely seriously. And I think it's important for people to understand how valuable the Constitution is and what the legacy of the Constitution is for America.
Well, I'll say this every time you bring up your service. I appreciate your service. For those of us who have slept warm under the blanket of the freedom that I have not taken I've not stepped out to protect like you did, it's much appreciated, sir. And I try not to take it for granted that people like you and John Ballinger and Clay Dennis and my dad and a bunch of my friends, I don't try not to take it for granted of the sacrifices made by you and many, many, many others, because I too take it serious. And I want to say that being a patriot does not always mean you have to wear a uniform. Being a patriot means you do what you can to protect the foundation of the country. And when I talk about the foundation of the country, qualifier, I'm not talking about all the evil stuff. The foundation of the country is what allowed us to navigate that and kind of cull that out of ourselves. Now, with that being said, and knowing that we have your history degree and your knowledge behind us, a lawsuit. I get this phone call last night from my buddy Eric Buchanan, who has lost his mind about hearing. We won't say even names. Some well-known radio,
a national radio show. Let's leave it at that.
And he's got one of the best podcasts in the nation, top 5 every. But you called me up and you go, "We got to get on a video. This guy is wrong." And I said, "Okay, when do you want to get on a video?" What about the Texas lawsuit? You start this conversation where you want. Why are they doing, or what did you hear that pissed you off?
Before we get to that, slow down and do a little bit of background just to be clear about this. I will say that I have tried very hard to be inquisitive and neutral about this election issue. That I don't know what fraud, if any, has taken place. I do know there's a whole lot of allegations out there.
Right.
The idea that there is no basis for questioning the election simply doesn't make any sense to me. One simple fact I think is extremely important for people to understand is in 2016, 33 million people voted by mail-in ballot or by absentee ballot, somehow voted by not showing up at a polling station. This year, we had 80 million people do that. We also had the highest ever turnout in American history. The record for people voting in an election was 130 million the first time that President Obama was elected. We also had close to that in 2016. Those outscored most other elections by far. Bush versus Gore was 102 million people that voted. Somehow this time we had 155 million people vote, 25 million more than have ever voted in a presidential election. Something like, and they're still figuring out the exact numbers, 80 million of those votes, which for those of us who have trouble with math sometimes, is more than half of 155 million.
Thank you.
80 million votes by mail or absentee came in this time. So anyone who says, well, this was the safest election ever, this was the most secure election ever, there's no way they've done the investigation or asked the hard questions or done anything to figure it out. It's just, it defies common sense to say that we did 2.5 times what we've ever done in the past, at the most in mail-in voting, and yet somehow it's supposed to be more secure. States have changed rules at the last minute. States have changed their procedures. A lot of us due to the coronavirus, and I understand. My mom was one of those people who absolutely said, "Yeah, we got to do more mail-in balloting. I don't want to go get sick." That's a legitimate concern. I don't have a problem with that, but it still needs to be done in accordance with the rules in the Constitution. So,
real quick, while you're breathing, side note. The discarded rate for mail-in ballots, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, even though we had over double this year, was less than normal. So we had fewer mistakes.
I was doing some research on that because I'm just curious, and I haven't found something definitive, but I did see one accusation or allegation, I guess is the proper way to say it, that the recent reject rate, I guess is the way you describe it, the percentage of mail-in ballots that are told that someone at the vote counting center says, nope, that the signature doesn't match up, the postmark doesn't match up, it doesn't qualify, is something like 6%. And somehow with 80 million votes coming in, the reject rate is like 1/2 of 1%.
Yeah, I got an article. I got the article I'll send you that's pretty reputable. But now that's a side note, because it just goes to show, this is what I was saying before I brought you up. I think there are plenty of things in which all may not point to being a stolen election or fraud, but there's tons of reasons to ask questions. And if we're going to start demonizing people for asking legitimate questions, shut up and take the results. That's not been the case since 2016. And I don't think it's fair. You should be able to ask the questions.
I agree. If you have someone tell you there was no evidence of fraud, or that you should just shut up and that there's something wrong with asking questions, I think that's a pretty un-American attitude. That's a pretty un-liberal attitude. That's in the classical sense of what a liberal is, that is what, I'm just going to flat out say it. That's what dictators tell you to do, is shut up and take it.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that ultimately I'm advocating that the election should be, quote, overturned, depending on how it actually came out. I just don't know enough. I'd like to know more. But I do know damn well that we as a country need to have confidence in our elections going forward, and that there are enough issues out there that need answers to the questions, that we should be fairly asking the questions and trying to get answers to these questions. That's what Americans have traditionally done. And if someone's telling you that that's not okay, that's somebody who's trying to fundamentally change America into a country that doesn't have free thinking, free press, free ideas, or freedom anymore. And that's not the America that we're supposed to have. And it's our job to protect that legacy. So
and it brings us to the lawsuit.
Even if it's just simply asking questions. So let's get to one specific thing that bothered me about the reporting on this. And the allegation that a certain conservative who was talking about this last night was being skeptical about. And he's saying that Texas is suing the 4 states whose electors are potentially still in play, depending on how this lawsuit comes out, under some kind of equal protection clause, because those states did not follow the same rules that Texas followed, or do what Texas liked for them to do, and that there should be some federal standard for elections. And the host was very upset about that, because he said, what if the Democrats get to start setting those rules? Then it's going to go the other way. It should be the states that set those rules. And therefore, this Texas lawsuit is stupid. And it doesn't make any sense. And that's what got me fired up, because I don't know where this Texas lawsuit is going to go, but I do know that it does ask some pretty darn interesting, reasonable questions. So let's be really, really clear about what's going on. Let's start with these basic facts. That the state of Texas, a sovereign state, not just a few people, not just some kooks, not just some lawyers somewhere, but the state of Texas has sued Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. And the allegation is that those states have engaged in an election process that violates the United States Constitution, specifically because the Constitution says that each state is supposed to pick their electors under the rules set forth by their legislature. So the Georgia legislature sets the rules for Georgia. The Wisconsin legislature sets the rules for Wisconsin, Pennsylvania for Pennsylvania, Tennessee for Tennessee, Texas for Texas. The state legislature sets those rules. Most states have something that's called an election commission or something similar to that. Most states also have courts that can get involved. And sometimes you end up in disputes about how voting rights should be enforced in a given state. And sometimes courts have to be involved. But when it comes to how electors are picked, that go into electoral college, that pick the president, it's specifically a requirement that it has to be done in accordance with the rules set by the state legislature. So, for example, if in Pennsylvania, the rule is, according to state law as set by the legislature, that all votes have to come in by mail by the day of the election, and the election commission or the state secretary of state, the Commonwealth Secretary of State, because it's Pennsylvania, enters into an agreement with the Democrat Party that the state will accept ballots 3 days late or a week late, as long as they're postmarked by the date of the election. Arguably, and I think pretty clearly, that's a clear violation of the Pennsylvania state law that the legislator put out that said we only count ballots that show up by election day. So what Texas is saying is that it doesn't matter if it was above board. It doesn't matter if it was done through a court process. It doesn't matter if no one was lying and no one was hiding. There was no fraud committed. Simply the fact that Texas changed their rule. That Pennsylvania changed their rules to allow votes to come in after election day in a way that is inconsistent with the rules that were set up by the state legislature. Any emergency rules that have been changed, any court-ordered rules that have been changed, or in most cases, someone files a lawsuit and then they enter into what's called a consent decree or a settlement to change the rules in that state. None of those are valid. You cannot do it that way.
Okay,
You,
so
so the
how
state
how should they
legislature,
do it?
the state legislature has to pass a change.
Okay.
So if in Pennsylvania you think it's, well, oh my gosh, coronavirus is happening, we need more people to vote, and some people are going to struggle to vote. And to be fair to the citizens of Pennsylvania, we think the rule should be that as long as you have it postmarked by election day instead of received by election day, that should be the rule. Simple answer in how you fix that under the U.S. Constitution. You go to the Pennsylvania legislature and you ask them to change the law, either permanently or just as an emergency provision for this year. We'll accept ballots the new way that makes it more liberal for them to come in. They did not do that. And I think that is an extremely valid concern about how our country should be run. If the Constitution specifically says that we just decided the rules are set by the legislature, then it's not okay for the state election commission, even in an emergency of the coronavirus, to make new rules. And it wasn't just that rule. They changed rules about how signatures would be confirmed in absentee ballots. They changed rules about the mailing, whether it had to have a postmark or whatever. Multiple rule changes in all of these states. That's what Pennsylvania is complaining about. I mean, that's what Texas is complaining about.
Right.
And specifically, it's not necessarily because Texas would have done it differently. That's not what they're claiming, and that's what the guy in conservative talk radio was saying last night. It's because those states are not following the Constitution. Then a couple other questions, and I just want to kind of walk through these legal issues, and you can ask me some questions. Yeah. But how does Texas have the right to complain about that? Well, Texas is saying, and actually in some of the briefing that they filed in the Supreme Court explains that there is case law supporting this, that there are cases that have gone to the Supreme Court in the past about how these electors are picked. Because electors are picked for a federal office, that states have an interest as a state to ensure that federal offices are picked in accordance with the Constitution. Otherwise, it deletes the power of that state, and states have the power to step in loco parentis for their citizens. In other words,
that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. Loco parentis is what I was going to say.
And what that basically means is that's their guardian, right? They can step into the place of the citizens as their guardian and to say our citizens' vote is being diluted when some other state doesn't follow the Constitution, especially in a way that potentially changes the outcome of this election. So I think I'm not going to say that I know for sure that these are the most solid grounds, but this is not you can't just dismiss these allegations. You can't just say, oh, this is just some kind of a show or something. These are serious, appropriate allegations under the Constitution. Now, how the Supreme Court's going to address them, maybe they throw it out tomorrow. Maybe we end up having hearings on this going on for a while. And I think there's lots of other questions we can talk about, what the remedy is, how it goes forward. And there are some other details in those filings. Let me pause for a second, let you ask questions as soon as I say two things. Anybody who's really interested in this and wants to be a legal nerd like I am, there are two things to read that have been filed in the Supreme Court. One is the actual complaint, where the state of Texas has sued 4 other states. We now have states suing each other right now in the United States Supreme Court over this election. And then the second thing they filed is a motion for a preliminary injunction and for the remedy. And the motion that they filed for the preliminary injunction is actually more of a legal brief that sets out the arguments under the law why Texas not only could win, but they have a good enough chance of winning that the court should go ahead and enjoin or stop. The Supreme Court should stop states from doing anything further to certify their electors or to actually stop the electors from voting in the Electoral College until these allegations can be heard out. Now, the state of Texas has made those constitutional arguments. They also are talking about some of the potential fraud and how these votes matter enough that it could change the outcome of the election. So it's all in there. Read both those documents, the actual complaint and the motion for a preliminary injunction.
So I was just going to say a couple things, and then I've got I'll read you that before we leave, because Ted Cruz is getting involved to go before the Supreme Court for President Trump now as representing his case too. So Ted Cruz is now coming back. Ted Cruz used to do that before he got elected. That's what he did.
Yeah, he was the Solicitor General for Texas, maybe.
I don't know. He's getting back involved though.
And that's what's confusing to a lot of people. It's confusing to me, and I've been trying to pay attention to this stuff. Is there's 30 to 50 different lawsuits going on, and several of them are filed by the team representing Donald Trump. Some of them have been filed by people representing the electors. Some of them have been filed by people in the local parties. And early on, before the facts had really been developed, a whole lot of those were thrown out. Some have still been thrown out because the court said, hey, you might have a point, but your point's not strong enough to change the outcome of the election. So the judge throws the case out.
Well, that's the other thing too. Just because a judge throws something out doesn't mean there wasn't fraud. Sometimes it just means that. It means like, okay, there may have been a little something going on there, but it's 1,000 votes and you lost by 10,000 votes. That's not going to change anything. We're not going to waste our time. The other thing is, and it's fair to say, an allegation or even affidavits does not mean it's evidence, but it's not proof of anything other than just that thing. So if it doesn't move forward, it's not because,
Yeah, so let's help people with this quick vocabulary lesson, because I think this is important. When you go to court, what counts as evidence is what somebody says out loud on the witness stand. It can also be written documents that are introduced into evidence if they follow the rules of evidence in federal court. An affidavit where somebody says, I swear under oath and penalty of perjury, I'll go to jail if I'm lying, that counts as evidence, and that's an affidavit. For a news reporter to say there is no evidence of fraud in these elections, that person is lying. There are not just a few, not just dozens, but literally hundreds of affidavits. Now, does that mean it's provable? Does that mean ultimately, if you put it in front of a jury or a judge, you can prove that a fraud occurred? No. It just means there's evidence, because there are, in fact, affidavits. Beyond having affidavits and evidence, then the other question is, do you have enough of that if you prove it, it would change the outcome of the election, which is what most courts say is something you also have to be able to present. So
right now, law, don't you just have to go from one burden of proof to the next? Like, here's the evidence, and then that evidence should lead to this verdict. Isn't that how that works?
That's the whole. Let's not get too far into that.
I'm just saying. In the law school I went to, they said present the evidence, you get the verdict you want. It's insert 1 + 1 = 2. I've learned in your world 1 + 1 sometimes equals 63. So
it depends on what one means.
You shut up. So I've got two things I was going to ask, and then we'll start the next part of the conversation. I think one of the things we talked about last night, and you've said it here, that is easiest for me to understand, is that Texas is suing those 4 states, and other states now. I think 8 states have joined Texas in the lawsuit because they're saying exactly that. Because you didn't follow the constitutional law and because you didn't follow the way it was supposed to work in your state, you just invalidated the votes of our state. So we have an obligation to protect our voters. The second thing is a question. Pennsylvania, and I remember headlines because Facebook is so good about posting headlines, people. Thank you so much. Before the election, Pennsylvania was at the Supreme Court. Somebody, I thought, approved all of these changes. And I asked you that last night, and you said that was based off a lawsuit that was going on. And can you explain that, or is that nothing? You don't want to go down that road?
Let me explain the basics. I understand them, but this is one of those places where trying to keep up with all this to make sure I say this absolutely accurately. Here's the story as I understand it. That there was a lawsuit before the election where the side of Donald Trump and the Republicans tried to argue that when Pennsylvania changed their rules to allow absentee ballots to come in late, that was not in compliance with what was the rules set by the Pennsylvania legislature.
Right.
And therefore would be a violation of the Constitution. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is 4 Democrats and 3 Republicans, voted 4-3 that case was not ripe yet, because there hadn't actually been an election that gave rise to a cause of action to show that they had enforced those rules in violation of the state election laws set forth by the legislature, and therefore the election laws required by the U.S. Constitution, because there actually hadn't been an election yet. After the election, a representative from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania sued to say, okay, now there's been these problems after the election, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, well, you didn't bring your case ahead of time when you should have, before the voting took place, and now you're asking us to disenfranchise voters, and we're not going to do that. And the Supreme Court, as I understand it, has rejected that case, and they're not taking that case. But it's not the only case going to the Supreme Court, presumably. The Supreme Court may have other cases. They certainly have to decide what to do with this case brought by Texas and now joined by, I think, 7 other states as co-plaintiffs.
Yeah, I think it is Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, South Dakota. And the rumor was that I threw out to you before we came on that we cannot find any proof of is that Tennessee was going to join that soon. But again, that's just things. That's Facebook journalism, and that's some meme that was already created before the fact.
Yeah, it's a little footnote to this. As you and I are both in Tennessee, for our Tennessee listeners, Tennessee is a really weird state. I think we may be the only state that our attorney general is not picked either by the legislature, by the governor, or by a general election. Our attorney general is appointed by the Supreme Court of Tennessee. And so he's not a very political, that's not a very political position. It really would come from, like in some other states, the governor saying, hey, our state needs to do this, and either order the attorney general to do it, or order the head, some other state's attorney to join the lawsuit.
I'm really good at with it. I don't know to this question I'm about to ask you. But how did they bypass the legislature? How did they get these rules in place? In other words, these things you say they're circumnavigating, other than the Pennsylvania one where somebody was raising their hand going, hey, you can't do that. You're doing it the wrong way. Was it just like the voting commission coming together and saying, hey, we're going to change this for this time, and everybody going, yes? Didn't somebody, I mean, it just seems to me this is a big thing to get around.
So I've been doing, again, some more research on this, and I don't have all the definitive answers, but let me say this. Were you as an American citizen who's engaged in politics and asking questions and doing these kind of webcasts in May and June and July and August, how much were you paying attention to the absentee voting rules in Wisconsin?
Tons. That's all I did every day.
Right? Or in Pennsylvania, unless it made the headlines like the Pennsylvania case did just a couple weeks before the election, people were not paying attention. What were we paying attention to starting in February, March, April? The damn coronavirus, the Chinese virus, as our president still likes to call it, and we can joke about that. But the coronavirus, the COVID, what were we all paying attention to by late May and throughout the summer? The serious questions about race in America and those protests. And then there was the riots. How much of it was a legitimate a protest, and what were the riots, and how much civil unrest is okay, and how much, all that stuff. That was a summer of all kinds of news going on. And at some point in there, we were also talking about the election, and we're also talking about the economy. We're talking about fast tracking the vaccines. We're talking about whether masks work or not, whether we're going to mandate masks, whether we're talking about internet censorship and big tech censorship.
Well, what the hell are we electing politicians for? Aren't they the ones that's supposed to be paying attention? Isn't the legislature supposed to be paying attention to make sure the legislation's followed?
So yeah, right. So one of those things that we can compare is, while the coronavirus was starting to get bad, what was going on in Congress? They were still doing the impeachment, and so it's whatever's making headlines at the time. So here's the thing: while this country, coronavirus, race relations, concerns about defunding the police versus police oversight, all the stuff about how much violence is actually going on. Are there white supremacists involved? What are they doing? What's the difference between Antifa and black? All that stuff that was going on. Meanwhile, while we weren't paying attention because it was not items number 1 through 10 in the headlines, is mostly Democrat organizations were going to the state election people and saying, hey, because of this coronavirus, we need people to be able to vote by mail-in ballots, and we need to make that easier for people. So they would petition the election commission to change the rules. And in some places, the election commission went, yeah, that's a good idea. We can make an emergency this year. We'll make it easier for mail-in balloting. But sometimes those rules violated what was already on the books for state election laws, like signature verification requirements or postmark requirements. Sometimes the state would say, no, we're not going to change the rules. So then in a lot of cases, Democrat affiliated, or actually the Democrat Party, would then file a lawsuit. And instead of these cases, in most for the most part that I've seen so far in my research, going to a judge and having a judge rule that, yeah, this is something we need to change. Instead, the state election officials, government employees who don't want to spend the summer fighting a lawsuit would go, okay, we'll settle. We'll settle with you. We'll enter into a consent decree that changes the election laws. So whether they did it voluntarily, the election commissions, or whether they did it in response to a lawsuit, these are still government agencies that are not the state legislature. They can't set new rules for elections that violate state law under state law, and they especially should not be doing it when it comes to the election of electors for the president of the United States, because that's a violation of, of the U.S. Constitution. That's the argument Texas has made. That's the argument that I think makes legal sense. What the Supreme Court's going to do with it, I don't know, but I think it's worthwhile for us to at least understand that I think it's a real argument.
I do too.
Question.
And you brought up all the things, and I'm not going to call everything a distraction because they're important issues. But when you pose, this is when I say, because I've done so many of these with you and John or Clay and Brandon, when we say shame on us as we the people, this is one of those small things I mean. When you're sharing headlines or you're buying all in, and this goes for the right and the left, conservative and liberal. If you're all in with a headline without reading the article or understanding the why you're cutting the fence, that analogy we've talked about before, I'm walking through the woods and I see a fence, so I just cut the fence without realizing why the fence is there in the beginning. Well, if you're doing that and you are actually demonizing people that say, hey, wait a minute, is that, because I did see these conversations, especially around Pennsylvania, you can't just change laws like that. And people would go, you're wanting people to die, it's not safe, that's bad. I mean, I saw a lot of labeling around the headline instead of some sense of, hey, you know what? We're a really smart country. We should be able to do two things at once, make it safe and make it constitutionally sound. We don't have to give up one without the other, especially when we spent all summer saying other things are okay in big mass groups with no mask because it's a topic we like. So when you say we've been distracted, I get very frustrated by that with myself because I saw the headlines and I knew something was going on. But to be honest, this is the problem I have. I just kind of default that, there's really smart people that'll jump in and stop that. And nobody did.
I had this same conversation with a friend a few months ago about one of the reasons I started doing this show and started doing some other volunteer work for some other organizations.
Wait a minute, what other organizations?
Braver Angels is a big one.
Oh.
I really like the work I'm doing with Braver Angels, which is a across the party divide organization that we're working on depolarizing America and having patriotic empathy. We do not try to change the minds of our fellow members, but we do try to have civil conversations about issues and learning how to talk to each other and remembering that we're all Americans first. We might disagree on politics, but it doesn't mean we're evil people and coming at each other's ideas in bad faith. Most people are coming at it in good faith. And we're working hard through that organization to have those kind of conversations. It's not designed to change people's mind. In fact, most leadership positions are designed to have a red person and a blue person. And we call them red and blue, so it's not quite as polarized as saying, hey, you're the liberal and you're the conservative, you're the Democrat and you're the Republican. I'm the red leader, she's the blue leader, whatever it is.
What, though? Those kind of conversations, and then tell us about your conversation you had with your friend a few months ago, whenever. But those kind of conversations, sometimes you can get your mind changed. It'll at least let you understand the other side more, but it also will help you clarify why you believe what you believe. There's a lot of times I've been questioned after the surface, like this third question or fourth point, and I go, oh, hell, I don't know. I got to think that one through a little bit.
And I something I'm very concerned about, and this is just something I've seen only recently as a lawyer, as an American, as a historian, as somebody who is a proud U.S. citizen. I've always been taught that an important part of what Americans do is we question authority, we ask questions, we don't just take it for granted. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That's how we learn. That's how we make sure that bad people don't do bad things, well, because no one's looking the other way. And the idea of shut up and take it, shut up and don't ask questions is so anti-American, and that's what's scary. That's what totalitarians do.
Say this little mantra and be quiet about everything else. Yeah.
Don't ask questions is not what free people are told to do. If you want to control people, you tell them to stop asking questions. Anybody tells you to stop asking questions, They're the problem, and we need to fight against that really hard.
All right.
Now, having asked questions, I'm not all, that's how we learn, and maybe we learn that stuff's not as bad as we think, or there's a different explanation. Going back to what you said about, well, I just was hoping the really smart people would be taking care of this. Let me tell you, first of all, the conversation I had with a friend earlier this summer, Clinton, you and I are about that age. It ain't okay for us to decide there's people older than us, senior to us, who are going to solve these problems. We are those people now, Clint.
Yeah.
We're the same age as many of the founding fathers were during the American Revolution. We are the age now of the leaders. There are some people still older than us that are good leaders, but those of us in our 50s, this is our time. This is when we have to take responsibility. It's not okay for me or you to call our daddy anymore and ask him to go solve this problem for us. It's
I
on
like
us.
that. Look at you,
Yeah.
calling some people out. You may drop being an attorney and just may become a civic leader.
So that's part of it. And I think part of it is also those of us who have thought about why these things are true. Why are these rules? Why do we believe the way we do as Americans? It's our responsibility to teach other people why these things are so important and to push back against some of the false narratives, the stories, the trying to convince people that it's not okay to ask questions. Oh, hell no, that is not okay. You don't learn if you don't ask questions. You might find out that you had nothing to worry about if you don't ask questions. Or you might find out that really, no kidding, the emperor is not wearing any clothes and something really bad did happen.
So is that conversation you had with your friend, is that where that led?
That was part of it. I've been doing some stuff with him all summer and a few other people trying to do our own little work of bringing people together and figuring out how to talk to our fellow Americans. Plus, I went out and joined Braver Angels and became very involved to the point where I'm now the co-chair for East Tennessee. Importantly, and I think this is part of what I think is fundamental about Braver Angels, is we learn to listen to each other and talk to each other, but we don't tell people it's not okay to have your own opinion. I did a workshop recently where I was matched with somebody who was a blue. She's a state senator from Tennessee now, and she's not going to stop voting the way she's going to vote and advocating for what she's going to advocate for, but we can talk to each other and not be mad at each other just because we differ.
And okay, two questions on that. First of all, when I said smarter people, I kind of get what you're saying. I meant, hey, there's people that live in Pennsylvania that are lawyers and in the legislature. There are people there that are really smart. I assumed somebody was going to stand up and go, absolutely not. We're not going to do this in the state. And then what I found was they got either shouted down or pushed aside, and it was circumnavigated. So when I said smarter people, I was talking about people like you for the state of Tennessee. If that were to happen in Tennessee, I would look around and I would never call you my father. I sure I can call you daddy. I can tell you that right now. Well, but when you're in these conversations with the people in Braver Angels or with other folks, and there's a glaring, somebody says something, and you have a statistic that shows what their belief is not true. How in my brain, and I'm guilty of this, it still didn't change our minds a lot of times. When somebody goes, this is my assumption, and you go, well, here's a bunch of statistics that show you're wrong, at some point, we have to change our minds.
Yeah, let's have that let's stick to what's going on with the Texas lawsuit, because that's a whole separate conversation. I'll just say it simply this way. It's amazing to me, and it's one of the big things I've learned this year, how divergent our news feeds are. And every time I think, when I'm talking to a friend who disagrees with me politically, and I've got a mic drop, slam dunk, I'm walking out of here like Michael Jackson walking off the stage for the third time, and I throw that out there in an email or a comment on Facebook, and something comes immediately right back that is this totally opposite set of facts I've never heard before. It happens all the time because we have such divergent news feeds.
I wonder if that's happening about this Texas lawsuit. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I wonder if there's a group of people out there that see a different spin on it than I would see.
You think? There's a hell of a lot of people doing that. When people immediately said, oh, it's propaganda, it's just showmanship, it doesn't mean anything, it's going to be dismissed right away. That's part of what's going on politically. If you're the side that's winning the election, you don't want somebody to have a good point when they sue under the Constitution. Let me just say this one more time. Anybody who's really interested, take the time to go read them. They're online. You can find them. Because they were filed by a state in the Supreme Court, it's interesting because even some of the outlets that were not covering any allegations of voter fraud are suddenly covering this one. This has made it to the important enough news that you can't just ignore it. When
So I
a
want to make
state
sure.
sues another state, that's not just a conspiracy theory.
So I want to make sure I understand this, though. You believe you don't know. As far as the details go, you're not predicting which way this is going to blow over, one way or the other. But you do see the validity in the lawsuit itself. And I want to say it again because we're 40 minutes into it, and people may just now be, they may watch this down the road. The state of Texas has a right to at least approach this the way they're doing. Correct?
That's my opinion.
Yes.
And I agree that with some of Texas's arguments that I've read in their motion for preliminary injunction. So let's cover a couple key points about this. So Texas is arguing that it's not a denial of equal protection just because those states didn't have fair election laws the way Texas would have done them. They specifically have the complaint that the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia had rules that changed Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin election law in a way that was not approved by those 4 states' legislatures. That is a requirement of the U.S. Constitution that the rules of the state legislators be used to pick the electors. You can't circumvent those rules. That's a violation of the Constitution. And who can go complain about that? Can any voter go complain about that? That's one of the arguments that in the past, the Supreme Court has thrown out voter lawsuits because just one voter can't say, well, that was my vote that didn't count so much when this other state way across the country did something screwy. And that's one of the reasons why it's okay for the state to step in, and Texas on behalf of itself and its population to say our population's votes were diluted when these other 4 states violated the Constitution. It dilutes the votes of those states that didn't violate the Constitution, that acted lawfully and constitutionally, is what they're actually alleging. To me as a lawyer, it's an argument that's worth getting an answer to.
Yes.
Now there's some other questions in here. One basically is how are we going to do all this in time? And Texas has actually argued that the only deadline that actually matters is January 20th, because that's when the president has to be sworn in. I might have a little problem with that because I think under the Constitution, there's a day set forth in the Constitution for the electors' votes to be read on the floor of the House and the Senate. I think that's January 6th. The votes have to be in by then. The Constitution also says the votes have to be turned in by a certain date to be set by Congress. Well, if we're going to argue that technically you have to follow the Constitution's rules, and the Constitution says Congress has to set a certain date, then can you change that? Can a court change that date because there's been election fraud? I think that opens up a difficult question, because if you're saying Pennsylvania has to strictly follow the rules of their state legislature, well, then doesn't the U.S. Congress and the Electoral College have to strictly follow the rules of the Congress if that's what the Constitution says they're supposed to do, is follow Congress's rules? In which case we may be running, there may only be like 5 days left, because I think it's December 14th or December 16th, something like that.
I think it's the 14th.
14th, yeah, that the electors' votes have to be turned in. Can the Supreme Court stay that? Interestingly, Texas actually cited a case where the Supreme Court said at some time in history that they could stay the votes by the electors where there was a valid concern of voter fraud worthy of staying those votes, which goes back to now we get January 6th as the deadline. As long as they get those votes to the floor of Congress by January 6th. Another interesting question: what's the remedy?
Well, if you're asking me, I say we just have a revote.
Yeah, you can't have a revote. Why can you not have why not a revote?
Don't ask me rhetorical questions like we're in school, Professor Buchanan.
The Socratic method versus Clint Powell. Well, for one reason, the Constitution says Election Day is the first Tuesday in January after the first Monday that's not the first of the month. So it's November 3rd or later, right? So it's the first Tuesday that's not November 2nd.
Right.
And that is Election Day. But that also brings back the point, well, if that is Election Day,
how do you get ballots coming in 5 days later and 3 days later?
Right. How are you counting ballots on November 10th? One of the other problems with the remedy, and this is let's just say if the allegations are true, part of what is insidious about these election fraud allegations. The concern is hundreds of thousands of people voted by mail. The narrative we're hearing is that those are mostly for Biden, which is why Trump, who had a tremendous lead in these key states as we all went to bed on election night, we woke up the next morning lost because the story is they were counting these absentee ballots that trended so much for Biden.
You mean when they stopped counting and then started counting back? Continue on, sir.
That's a whole different conversation about actual fraud. But the question is, if you can raise legitimate concerns that these votes should not have been counted because the rule that said verifying the envelope for the signature or for the postmark, that the new rule that didn't comply with the state legislature's rule is wrong and therefore unconstitutional and shouldn't have been done. How do you fix that? And the problem is that some states, it's happened a lot by now. The people were counting the votes and taking the vote out of the envelope. And once you remove the envelope over here and the ballot over here, the ballot goes in the vote stack. The envelope goes in a big stack of envelopes. You can go back through all those envelopes and say, okay, this one, look at this. This is supposedly Mr. Smith from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, but he voted in Gettysburg and he shouldn't have an absentee ballot. Well, let's throw his vote out. Can't do it. Which one of the votes in that giant stack over there is Mr. Smith from Gettysburg? Because once they've been separated, you can't do that. So you don't know what percentage of those votes that were potentially contested went to Biden or Trump. Because once they've separated the two, there's
no thread. They've severed the connection. Yeah.
They've severed the connection, and there's no way to go back and audit to determine the damage done by breaking the rules and allowing votes to count that shouldn't have counted. And that is a new problem. Well, it's been an ongoing problem, but it's not been a serious problem that's gotten the attention of America like this one has. And going forward, we better pay attention to that. How are we going to handle those rules in the future? If ballots, instead of being thrown out at the rate of about 6%, because there's usually problems, to now it's 0.5%, and we have no way of going back and going, what happened to the other 5.5% of what are usually bad ballots? And the Supreme Court says, yeah, you can't do it that way. You have to check the signatures. You can't have people go back and fix them after the fact. They have to have a postmark. They have to be received by election day. Pennsylvania, go recount that and do that right. In Pennsylvania, you can go,
see what bothers me about
sorry, we got it. We've already stolen the election. We stole it fair and square, and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, because you changed the rules and play by the rules doesn't mean the rules were set with good faith, and it doesn't mean the outcome should be therefore considered legitimate. Even other things that frustrates me though when I hear these kind of things is it makes me wonder: are these changes going to be permanent? So, and moving forward, if we don't learn to fix the election, this is how elections, I fear, are going to look every time. I think if we do not learn how to fix this problem, this is an opportunity as much as it is a sad place for us in our hearts. It's an opportunity, I think, for us to say, okay, this is batshit crazy. This is not what we want to be doing. How do we fix this? Because I don't want massive lawsuits in 4 years. And I want to be able to trust that when I go vote, somebody in Pennsylvania and somebody in Georgia is not diluting my vote because they're not playing by the rules that are set forth. I think it's an opportunity to fix it. But are you scared that these things, this is kind of going to be the way elections are and everything's kind of permanently variable now?
I am scared about that. Absolutely. I'm scared about that. I'm hoping it's not going to happen. One problem we have is that the party that wins the election using these techniques has zero incentive to go back and fix the techniques or even addressing it, because then it might come out that it was wrong. So, and that could happen to either side. I'm not picking on Democrats or Republicans. It's whoever wins. When the president of Venezuela gets reelected as president, he has zero interest in going back and doing election fraud reform and trying to figure out what election fraud occurred to make sure it's going to be more fair next time. The winners who just want to make sure, hey, that system worked for us great this time, let's make sure it keeps working.
If my conservative friends think if Trump had come out on top, if this was reversed, don't act like Trump, and I voted for Trump. Don't act like, though, we would all be sitting around going, you know what, we really do need to take this to court to make sure Trump won. We would be, if it was reversed, everybody would be saying the exact same thing the other side is saying now.
Maybe. I hope
I
to
fear
think,
that.
as an American, that's one of the things that I've tried to be somewhat principled about, is understanding. I've actually had conversations with people that there was allegations of voter fraud in 2016. There were allegations of Russian interference. And my answer has been, I can show you the allegations now in 2020. I'd like to talk to you about those allegations and see what you think. Could you give me the specific allegations in 2016 about what actually happened and how it might have affected the election? Oh, you're just bringing up a sore subject because that was something that happened in 2016.
They spent $100,000 in Facebook ads. That's what they did. That's all they did.
Yeah, I'm happy to have that conversation. I'm not having anybody come to me and say, here are the specific allegations of how the Russians hacked into the 2016 election and changed the election, or at least made major voter fraud. But Rudy Giuliani's got 800 affidavits. The state of Texas has laid out in their complaint some very specific things that are hard to explain away as being not voter fraud.
So I'm reading this article citing Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution. Landry argued the power of the conduct of the federal elections is held by the state legislators in each state. In the states like Pennsylvania, the judicial branch attempted to seize control of these duties and obligations and set their own rules. These actions appear to be unconstitutional. And that was the gentleman from Texas. And there's several. This is a pretty good article. It's the Center Squared. I know you found another one. So there are articles out there that try to present it, I think, from a fairly, this is just the details of what's going on without a slant to it.
And then there's a slant, and then there's all the people trying to ignore it because it's just fake news.
Well, that's what's happening. That's where I come back to. Literally, I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 headlines shared by people I know. All of them, the headline was the Attorney General for Texas should be barred. It's malpractice. They're all desperate. This is nothing but like a play on Broadway. It's all for show. I mean, it was just those headlines. And
so we don't want to actually address the merits of the allegations. We don't want to address the legality, the legal theory behind them. We're just going to put some name on it and hope it's going to disappear and go away. To me, that is the strongest indication that there is something valid in this being brought by Texas, and that there aren't good arguments against it. If there were good arguments against it, there are smart attorneys on the Democrat side who could explain, well, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. This is what's wrong with Texas's arguments.
Yeah.
And we can explain this away. But when they just say things like it's malpractice, he should be disbarred, those are not arguments. Those are just trying to
distractions.
Name calling.
Yeah.
That's second grade. Your mommy's fat too kind of stuff.
Hey, easy, buddy. My mom's beautiful. Thank you very much. Hey, real quick, a question. This was a conversation that I know you wanted to have. I want to make sure you say everything that you want people to know about this lawsuit again and restate the purpose behind it. I just want to make sure that your brain on this subject for now, because this is going to change, and I don't mind coming back on and doing another one, but I want to make sure that you have got it out of your brain and out there for people to consume. And I want to make sure you said everything you want to say.
So I do want to talk a smidge more about the remedy.
Mm-hmm.
What are the different and I also want to talk about what the Supreme Court could do sort of going forward with this case. Let's do that first. So the other question is, you asked, well, what's going to happen going forward? Well, we don't want to see this going forward. And the party winning is going to have the power to not investigate. And maybe in some of these states like Arizona and Georgia, where the legislator is predominantly Republican, they may have hearings and they may go forward and investigate more even after a president is sworn in. Let's say Biden gets sworn in on January 20th. Who's going to go back and make sure this stuff doesn't happen in the future? And some Republican legislators might. But here's the other interesting thing. Texas actually argued in this case that even if these issues cannot be resolved by January 20th, and Joe Biden is sworn in and inaugurated as president of the United States, this case is not moot because there's a doctrine related. So mootness is you sue and then the other side basically either agrees with you or it's already, whatever you're trying to stop has already happened, so you can't fix it anymore. And so there's no point in having a lawsuit. There's an exception to the mootness rules that basically says if it's capable of repetition, and it's an important constitutional issue, that the court should address it anyway to say the next time that this happens, these are the rules. And Texas has included that in this case, that even if the Supreme Court, I think this is where the Supreme Court might potentially, if they take this on with any seriousness, split the baby down the middle. And the way that they might split the baby down the middle is they're going to say, we can't disenfranchise all these voters in Texas and in Georgia and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. It's just there's too many unknowns. They unwrapped the envelopes, and now there's no way to track which votes were legal and which votes were illegal because they've been separated from the envelopes. There's all these other issues why we can't go back and fix it. But we are going to say, as a matter of constitutional law, that a state cannot change its election rules unless those rules are those rules set out by the legislature. And maybe the Supreme Court's going to go there. And maybe it doesn't fix this election, but it's going to make it more interesting in future elections. And maybe they could also address the question of, and if the state tries to do that, that there is standing for someone to complain about it ahead of time so the election rules are firm come election day. I think those are two important things the Supreme Court could do out of this case if they choose to do that. I hope they're not going to just throw it out.
Yeah, I like that. And the fact that you said, I completely agree. They may say we're not going to disenfranchise all those voters. It's odd, though, if you look at it, and if they actually say, yeah, they did violate the Constitution, but we're not going to disenfranchise those voters. What they're saying is we're going to disenfranchise all the other voters, though, kind of. You know what I'm saying? In my world, and I'm not in my law degree from East Ridge that I've written on a piece of paper right here.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's the problem is when you say we're not disenfranchising this one group to protect them, well, what are you doing the other half of the people? In Georgia, it's down to 12,000, 11,000 vote difference. So you're disenfranchising one or the other by picking these winners and losers at this point. I still want to talk about the remedy, but then you made me think of this quote. No right is more precious in a free country than that of having a voice in the election of those who make the laws under which as good citizens we must live. Other rights, even the most basic rights, are illusory if the right to vote is undermined. There's no point in having a First Amendment in the United States, a Second Amendment in the United States. There's no point in having the Seventh Amendment right to a jury or Fourth Amendment right from unreasonable searches and seizures. The Bill of Rights is not worth the paper it's written on if it's reprinted on recycled crap paper.
That's right.
If you don't have the right to vote, if the right to vote is taken away from us, and the right to vote is not just the right to go cast a ballot, it's the right to have your vote counted fairly under the rules. And if our votes don't count fairly under the rules, we've lost the right to vote. If our vote counts less than somebody else's vote, if somebody else's vote counts less than mine because they've set up some machine to count them wrong, or because they're letting in illegal votes because they changed the rules in a way that's not permitted, then that's the scary stuff that we need to, as a country, demand to be fixed right now. All
right, before you go back to your remedy, I sent you a chat, but I'll just tell you, you're going to end up killing everybody down the road with that pen. You better stop clicking it, man. I used to do it all the time, and my buddy gave me something to chew on. So go back to the remedy because you were finishing up. You mentioned you gave two ways that they could take it.
All right. So one question was, even if ultimately they say we're not going to order the elections overturned, the Electoral College meets, we're still going to decide the lawsuit to say going forward these rules have to be followed. I think that's possible. What else could they do if they want to go, if the Supreme Court really has a problem here? Well, they could simply try to stay the date that the electors meet and then allow some of these other lawsuits to go forward, or more investigations, and allow the taking of evidence into this fraud. And this is one of the things that Texas has done here by Texas suing other states in the Supreme Court. It's one of the only ways that a case can be filed at first in the Supreme Court. Normally you have to file in a trial court, then go to the Court of Appeals, and then the Supreme Court can decide if they're going to take it or not. States have a right to sue another state only in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically becomes the trial court. There's even an argument they have to take the case. And there's some case law that says maybe they don't have to, but they should whenever two states are suing each other. So that this is one of the arguments that Texas now puts all this stuff in play that the Supreme Court's going to be in charge of figuring out what kind of fraud there has been. So let's say the Supreme Court maybe gives some more time to look into that. What are the choices? Well, one choice is they could say, we found enough evidence of fraud in Pennsylvania that all 20 electors in Pennsylvania go to Trump instead of Biden. They might be able to do that. That would be, they'd have to have some good evidence. I doubt they're going to do that. One argument is they can send the case back to Pennsylvania and say, we're not disenfranchising your voters because we don't want to take away their right to vote. But your election commission did by changing the rules against your rules. So state legislature, you have the right under the Constitution now. You pick the electors. So the legislator could pick who's going to get the electors for Pennsylvania. And the third option is the Supreme Court could say, this is such a mess, we're just not going to allow Pennsylvania's electors to come to the table at all.
Could they split electors? Is that a possibility?
I don't see how they could do that.
Okay.
Because the whole point is you have to pick the electors in the accordance to the way that the state legislature does. So Pennsylvania's legislature has a rule that we give all of our electors 20 to whoever wins the popular vote in the state of Pennsylvania, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But the question is who really won the popular vote, counting the legal votes is what one side is arguing. The Supreme Court could say, well, that's so messed up, we're just going to send it back to the legislature. And the legislature technically could say, okay, we're finding this election to be too fraudulent. We're going to throw it out and we will pick the electors. Another possible outcome is the Supreme Court just says, nobody gets Pennsylvania's electors because you guys didn't run a constitutional election. Now, if nobody gets Pennsylvania's, we are down to
250. I mean, does that change? You don't have to have what, 270?
You have to have 270. You have to have 270 even.
Yeah.
And I think Biden's at 304 right now. If you give all 4 of these states to Biden, so you take 20 of that, and you're down to 284. I think if I remember right, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Michigan all have more than 14.
Mm-hmm.
So if you lose Pennsylvania and one other one, if they get thrown out, Biden does not have 270 anymore. If I can remember how many electors there are, and if nobody has 270 because they all get thrown out, then that triggers the other clause in the Constitution that says then the House of Representatives gets to pick the president.
Hey, I'm gonna let you. Can you talk about remedies for 30 seconds? My daughter's calling me. I got to take it.
Yeah. So there's an article in the Constitution that says if there aren't 270 electors. And it's designed really to be in the situation where there's 3 candidates and maybe one region of the country votes for one person, another region votes for a third person, another region votes for the second person, and no one gets 270. And in this case, though, it may fall out that if you actually disallow a certain number of states, the Supreme Court could theoretically do that. I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying that's a possibility for the sake of conversation. And if they throw out 2 to 4 of these states that are in this lawsuit, and they don't give them to Trump, but they just throw them out entirely, then it goes to the House of Representatives, and the vote for the vice president goes to the Senate. One last important thing to remember about that, if that ever happens, and it hasn't happened, I think probably since the 1820s, although it was close to happening in 1876, 1877, that if it goes to the House of Representatives, it's not a majority vote taking into account all members. It's each state gets 1 vote. And I think the way it's shaking out now, it will be the new Congress that will have been sworn in. There's more Republicans, but still not a majority, but they control more states. And I think it's 31 states have a majority delegation that's Republican. So in theory, they would pick President Trump. In the Senate, I haven't done the math yet. It's going to be damn close.
Well,
whether
I think we're tied right now.
Kind of what happens in Georgia.
I don't know. I can't remember if we're tied now. Just so you know, Biden has 306. Trump has 232 currently. Just throwing that out there so you know what's up with that.
Yeah. So if you take out 20 for Pennsylvania, you're down to 386. Georgia may be 16. Wisconsin, and maybe it would matter for 3. You need 3 of these or any 3 of these going away would get Biden below 270.
And right now, if I'm not mistaken, the Republican Party has 50 in the Senate, 46 in the Democratic Party, but that's with several elections pending, and you have to have the 51, of course, for the majority.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm
just giving you a heads up.
There's 2 seats left in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
There's 50 Republicans. Well, that's actually an important part of this. If it's thrown into the Senate and it goes 50-50, the sitting vice president is the president of the Senate will not be Kamala Harris, because she won't have actually been brought in yet. It's the new Senate voting for this election, and the current Senate dividing vote is Vice President Pence.
Yeah, he would be the deciding.
He could be the deciding vote if it comes down 50-50.
Well, and so all this started though with
fun and games with American politics, history, and the Constitution.
Well, and again, it all started with Texas, and I think it gave a legitimate voice to a lot of people who have been saying stuff and being dismissed as conspiracy theorists, and especially and not all the people, all of my friends. Go ahead.
Just to be clear, Clint, are you saying that if the state of Texas does it, that makes it not a conspiracy theory?
No,
because I know plenty of people are going to say if Texas did it, that means it is a conspiracy theory.
I just mean that a collective voice. There was a lot of voices screaming out loud in the wilderness, like saying, "Hey, this doesn't look right. This doesn't look right." And finally, a big voice got up and said, "Hey, this doesn't look right. Let's ask some legitimate questions." And I'll say this, and it's not the majority of my Democrat friends or liberal friends, but there's a good host of them that for 4 years have actually posted, "Not my president," even when the Russiagate was found to be a hoax as far as any validity to it. And so it kills me when those people start posting things like "Get over it, it's our turn." To me, that's the un-American part. It's the un-American part when any side says, shut up, don't ask questions. And just like we might not have liked Russiagate, but we spent over $30 million in over 2 or 3 years investigating. So my question is, it goes back to exactly what I said when I first started this. Why have we lost our ability to let the process run its course? The state of Texas has done what it's supposed to do. It's raised its hand. It said, we have questions. And I love what you said. It may get thrown out tomorrow. There may be zero validity to it when they open up the basket of goodies in a courtroom. But we got, as Americans, at least be able to say, even if it's not my side, we got to keep the rule of law in place. It's got to drive an attorney crazy when people just want to say, screw the rule of law. It's no reason for that. We don't like the way this feels.
That is a big concern, and I hope that I can be objective enough that it's either side. If either side, Republican or Democrat, says, well, the rule, maybe we violated it a little, but it worked out for us, so we're not going to complain. We got to fix that both ways. It's not okay to say, well, it's our turn because it looks like right now we won, no matter which side you're on. We haven't gotten deep into the allegation of voter fraud, and I don't want to do that for this.
Yeah.
Because I want to talk about some of how the rules have changed. I will say this, that number one, Democrats did a very good job of playing the ground game. They also had a lot of money come from some interesting places. Go do some research. Mark Zuckerberg's people put $350 million into local election officials through various charitable organizations that upped the ground game for registering voters, and it arguably had a disparate impact on some of these areas that are more likely to vote Democrat. That's a story that's worth looking into. No one's disputing that.
George Soros.
They did a better ground game, and then the other ground game, the process game, was the Democrats were out there filing these lawsuits to open up the voter rules to make them less strict, and arguably that helped them. I mean, that's actually what they're saying is the explanation for these massive vote changes in the middle of the night, was that a lot more mail-in votes went to them.
Well, and I think go ahead. I'm sorry.
Instead of 94% counting, now all of a sudden it's 99.5% counting, because they did a good job changing the rules on the ground. And the Republicans, I'm not saying need to be out there violating the Constitution by getting their state laws to change in a way that's not approved by the state legislature. What the Republicans have got to do is they got to fight back, and they've got to go in and file lawsuits to say this ain't going to happen again. That in this state, in the state of Georgia, in the state of Wisconsin, no election official can change the rules in a way that's contrary to what state law says it should be. And then they've got to enforce that, and they've got to stay on top of it. Republicans have got to play those games.
I posted, if President Biden wins this election and it's a fair election, if we come to the conclusion at this and they go, nope, looks like Biden won, I said, he'll be my president. You would be amazed at how many people that I got, never will be my president. I thought, man, we just got through demonizing people for 4 years for saying the same thing. And again, though, that's with these questions being answered. And go back to your point, the headlines are full of, George Soros, puts 28 million into local elections. Bloomberg put $100 million, I think it was, into Florida. So, and of course, feel free to send me the links of all the Republican big donors that dump money into it. But you're right. I think right now we're playing catch up on the conservative side because we didn't make a big enough stink about these changes when they were happening, and the rules got changed. And now I hope that they're not permanent. That's my biggest concern. So you did a good job, man. Anything else you want to say before we leave?
I just love doing this with you, Clint. It is so much fun. I can't wait till we're together to talk in person again.
No.
When are we going to go do a boxing workout together?
Dude, I'm a boy in a bubble. You know me. You're my attorney when it comes to health stuff. You know that. I'm the boy in the bubble, man.
As soon as you feel safe again.
I do. I'm getting ready. As soon as this is over, I'm calling my daughter back, and then I'm going downstairs in my basement and have my 30-minute shadow boxing that I do every day. So I'm going to go beat the crap out of some invisible guy in my garage.
I've got a heavy bag in my garage.
I've got a heavy bag ready to be hung up. The problem with it is I've got a metal I-beam that I got to drill a hole through, and I just don't have a drill bit that'll get through that. So I got to work on that.
Order one from Amazon.
Yeah. All right. Somebody send me one for Christmas. All right, Eric Buchanan. I appreciate this one, dude. And I'll see you Monday.
Thank you, Clint. Thanks for having me on. This was a good one.
Yep. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate the content. Talk to everybody. See you.
All right. Bye.